All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Tuleyome's August Nature and You lecture. I'm Jeff Ben, Tuleyome's Education Associate. If you don't know, Tuleyome is a conservation nonprofit based in Woodland, California. Our mission is to engage in advocacy and active stewardship with diverse communities to conserve, enhance, restore, and enjoy the lands in our region. We do a variety of different things, including this monthly lecture series, K-12 field trips. We do a lot of hikes and wildflower tours for the general public. And we also have a youth boot bank, which does loans of hiking boots for youths in our community. If you'd like to learn more about any of those programs, you can do that on our website. And that's also where you'll find our events calendar for all of our upcoming events. And I've got a preview of that up on the screen now. So on to tonight's lecture. So this lecture series is supported by donations from folks like you. If you haven't done so already, we would greatly appreciate a small donation if you're able to help support our programs. And so with that, we are very lucky to have Dr. Emily Taylor as our speaker for tonight. Dr. Taylor earned her PhD in biology from Arizona State University and is now a professor in biology at Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo, where she is the director of the Physiological Ecology of Reptiles Laboratory. And tonight she is here to tell us all about the rattlesnakes of California, which I'm quite excited about. And so during the talk, we do ask that you keep yourselves on mute and hold any questions that you might have until the end, at which point we will have plenty of time for Q&A with Dr. Taylor. All right, so with that, I will turn it over to you, Dr. Taylor.
Awesome. Hello, everybody. I am really excited to be here tonight. Can someone confirm that my presentation looks all right on your end? Yeah, you can hear me okay? Okay, great. Awesome. Well, thank you, Jeff, for inviting me. I told him earlier, any excuse I have to talk about snakes, I'm always excited to do that. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to be chatting with you tonight about California rattlesnakes, which are my favorite kind of snakes. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about why that is and showing you some really amazing photography. And at the end, the hint, some amazing videography, some recent things we've been learning about rattlesnakes. So I wanted to start with kind of a funny quote by Carl Linnaeus, who didn't like snakes. In fact, he didn't like reptiles, amphibians really at all. He called them foul and loathsome animals. He said they're abhorrent because of their cold body, pale color, cartilaginous skeleton, filthy skin, fierce aspect, calculating eye, offensive voice, squalid habitation, and terrible venom. And he furthermore went on to say, so their creator has not exerted his powers to make many of them. Well, Carl Linnaeus would have done well to follow his own advice here about confirming things with observation, because there's actually a ton of snakes, aren't there? And they're beautiful. Snakes are an incredibly diverse group of animals. If Carl had maybe gotten out of Europe a little more back in the 1700s, he would have known that. And so if you're here tonight, you may be a snake lover, or you may be a snake curious. And today is going to be a celebration of snakes that will help you make you even more so. In terms of how many there are, in fact, there's about a little over 4,000 species of snakes in the world. And if you look at this, that's as of March 2024. And literally back in 2008, there was 1,000 fewer, full 25% fewer. And so a lot of these snakes have been described recently. And a lot of these are, snakes where maybe they split one species into multiple, but some of these are just brand new to science, like remote area of Ecuador or Papua New Guinea, and they find new snakes. So there's just a lot more left to learn out there. And I wanted to say that in addition to being really common, snakes are really common in California. All right, so we're here to talk tonight about California snakes and specifically California rattlesnakes. But broadly speaking, even beyond rattlesnakes, California is an amazing state for snakes. But California has nearly 50 species of snakes, which is a lot considering that the landmass of California, despite it being a large state, it only accounts for, less than 1/4 of 1% of the landmass of the planet. And yet it has 1.5% of the snake species in the planet. So it has more snake species than you would expect. And of course, the reasons for that are many: diversity of climates, high, big latitudinal spread, all different kinds of ecosystems, and of course, vast open lands that have remained undeveloped in our beautiful state. There's also diversity in terms of what types of snakes. So there's snakes from 5 different types of families. Today we'll be talking about one of those, which is the Viperidae and the subfamily Crotalinae, or pit vipers, including rattlesnakes. And like I just said before, snakes occupy every inch of California from the coast to the deserts. They even get into urban areas. Luckily, rattlesnakes, maybe not so much. Luckily, I say, for people who wouldn't want them to be there, which is most people. Heck, I mean, I love rattlesnakes. I don't necessarily want one in my yard either. I prefer to see rattlesnakes out in nature. Okay, so part of the reason I've been giving a lot of talks lately is because I just wrote a book, and it was my very first book, and it was published in May of this year by Heyday Books out of Berkeley, California. And I'm really excited about this book, what it looks like. And this book is it's kind of like a field guide, but it's a not highly technical field guide. It's more of just a celebration of snakes. So each species account has beautiful photos and has information on how to find those snakes in the wild, because I like to say that snake hunting is the new bird watching. And then also just stories about these snakes. So I'm going to read a couple of excerpts as we go through the talk today. Not very much. I'm only going to do it a couple times when I'm talking about rattlesnakes. But I'm going to do it a couple times so that you can get a feel for what the book is like. And then mostly I'm just going to be waxing poetic on my own about beautiful rattlesnakes. All right, so first of all, what are rattlesnakes? The 2 main characteristics that we really think about when we think about rattlesnakes are the venom and the rattle. And so I just wanted to spend a minute before we start going into the different species of rattlesnakes in California and talking about rattlesnakes in general and why they're important, what they do. I wanted to talk about their venom and their rattles really briefly. So first of all, their venom. Rattlesnakes produce venom in these paired venom glands on the sides of their heads. That's what gives them that poofy triangular shaped head. And that venom is a cocktail of many, many complex proteins. And those complex proteins are held in this venom gland right here until the snake decides to strike for its prey. That's what venom is evolved for, is to strike prey. And when the snake strikes its prey, the muscles surrounding that venom gland contract and squeeze that venom out through this duct, through these hollow hypodermic needle-like fangs, and then into the prey. Okay. Venom consists of many, many proteins, including anticoagulants to cause internal bleeding in the prey, cytotoxins or cell toxins to cause the breakdown of tissues, and in some cases, neurotoxins to speed along death. And rattlesnakes notably really only use their venom as like a later line of defense. The venom is made for eating prey, and they'll use it only if they have to defend themselves. They prefer to use camouflage and then, of course, rattling. So rattling is something that is obviously unique to rattlesnakes. Rattlesnakes only occupy the Western Hemisphere, and there's about 50 species of rattlesnakes, including 7 in California, and they all share this one characteristic. And the idea is that they evolved this structure on their tail called a rattle, and it is used to warn off predators. This structure is made of keratin, which is the same material that's in your fingernails. And there's a lot of mythology, a lot of myth busting I have to do tonight about the rattlesnake rattle. What's true about the rattlesnake rattle is that the snake adds a new segment every time it sheds. So it's born with this birth button that you see here. And then as it grows, it creates some new component to it, and then it sheds and it forms this next one, and so on and so forth. So the ones here at the end are older than the new ones that are forming at the base. However, it's not true that you can tell the rattlesnake's exact age by the number of rattles. And that's because, well, sometimes it sheds more than once or not even at all every year. And also it's because it breaks off. And this is made of the same material as your fingernails, and it breaks right off. So we can't tell the age of a rattlesnake based on its rattle. I wanted to show you something else that's really cool, is that we're used to looking at or thinking about the outside of a rattlesnake's rattle, but on the inside, it's really fascinating. So it's not hollow and filled with beads or something to make it like a baby rattle. Instead, each one of these segments that you can see actually has a hidden component that subdivides and loosely interlocks with the ones beyond it. And so for that reason, when the rattlesnake shakes its tail, all those little interlocking pieces are going to bang against the ones next to them. Now, this is a model of a rattlesnake rattle. There's no rattlesnakes that are that big, of course. But you can see how this would work. It's actually a really cool looking structure if we take a look at it like that. Okay. So I wanted to begin our exploration of California rattlesnakes with an ode to this beautiful animal, which is the rattlesnake that you have up in the Sacramento area. It's also the one that I have down here. It's broadly called the Western rattlesnake. And the Western rattlesnake is it's a really, really awesome animal. Well, I'm going to read to you about it. I'm gonna do my first excerpt where I read from my book so that you can get a feel for what this is like. And then I'm going to tell you more about it biologically. Okay. Um, Choosing a favorite snake for me is like asking a parent to pick a favorite child. Almost impossible. The expected answer might be the most striking, beautiful snake, and on some days, sinuous snake beauty is indeed the most compelling draw for me. However, as a biologist, I have a more nuanced view of what it is to like or indeed to love wildlife. Beauty matters, sure, but more important is the feeling I have when I encounter a snake in the wild. It's the thrill of the hunt and the greater thrill of finding a snake. It is watching their interesting behaviors, which I might have missed if I had interfered with them by prodding them or capturing them. It is their success in persisting in high numbers, even in areas where people persecute them. And this braided connection is strongest for me with the Western rattlesnakes, which I confess is my absolute favorite snake. Western rattlesnakes, like other rattlesnakes, is unfairly vilified and sensationalized by nearly everyone. The truth is that this species, which is notable in California because its wide range and high density means that it is the rattlesnake species that most often comes into contact with people, it's actually a gentle snake that wants nothing to do with us. In fact, it does us a great service by controlling rodent populations that, if left unchecked, would denude our plants, eat our crops, and spread disease. Western rattlesnakes can live for decades, have complex social lives, complete with family and friends, and give live birth to pups that they protect from predators during the vulnerable period before the first shed. Sheer volume of my experience with these beautiful snakes has bred in me a strong affection and urgent need to share what I know about living peacefully with Western rattlesnakes. There you have it. There's a feel for what my book is like. All right, so where are we? We are here on the coast with a beautiful Western rattlesnake. This is Montaña de Oro State Park here locally on the Central Coast. This is a beach called Spooner's Cove, which is very, very popular among people. Lots of rattlesnakes there too. Lots of interactions between people and rattlesnakes. Very, very, very rarely negative ones because this is a state park where people are there recreating and they know that the rattlesnakes are there. Let's talk now about the distribution of this Western rattlesnake. I'm going to now be going through all 7 species and telling you little stories about them as I go. But I'm going to go through them pretty quickly and then I'll get back to rattlesnakes in general. Okay, so all 3 of these colors, orange up here, red and blue, are all the same species. These represent subspecies of the same species. Green just shows that they're not present there because, as you'll see, there's different species of rattlesnakes that live in our deserts in California. So the Northern Pacific rattlesnake in red and the Southern Pacific rattlesnake in blue, those are just subspecies of this Western rattlesnake complex. And then up in the orange is another subspecies, but that subspecies is a beautiful one that I thought I would mention it specifically for you here. That is the Great Basin rattlesnake, which is, again, closely related to the ones that you have right over there in Sacramento, but this one lives on the eastern slope of that Northern Sierra. Just a really unique looking animal, goes well into Nevadas in addition. Okay, so now I'm going to pretty rapidly move through the other species of rattlesnakes. And so if you have questions about these, definitely get your pens out and write down questions for these at the end. Because I don't want to make this about like a field guide. I don't want to make this like I'm just going to show you a bit of information. I'd rather tell you stories about rattlesnakes in general. So we're going to just be pretty quick about this. Okay, so the second species of rattlesnake in California is the Mojave rattlesnake. And this is probably the most infamous. Mojave rattlesnake, as you can see here, lives in the Mojave Desert. And the Mojave rattlesnake has a reputation that it does not deserve. It has a reputation of being the most aggressive snake. But I would actually challenge you to think of the word aggression as being inappropriate for rattlesnakes. Aggression implies that an animal is like going after something else. So maybe they're aggressive towards kangaroo rats that they want to eat, but they're certainly not aggressive towards people. They're defending themselves. But also, they don't necessarily have any more of an attitude than other rattlesnakes. They vary quite a bit. I've met many Mojave rattlesnake out on a desert road at night, and some of them are mellow and some of them are rattly, and some of them are defensive. Mojave rattlesnakes in California, especially certain populations, do have a highly neurotoxic venom. So they're known to have a particularly dangerous venom. But like I said, they don't want to bite people. They actually have many fewer bites by Mojave rattlesnakes than by Western rattlesnakes every year to people and dogs, just because there's not as many people and dogs out here in the desert as there are in the places along the coast where Western rattlesnakes live. Look at this animal. Isn't this animal just absolutely stunning? This animal, who was photographed by Marissa Ishimatsu, who, by the way, is a Marin County-based photographer who took most of the photos for my book, is really stunning. I like to call it a Halloween snake. This is, of course, a southwestern speckled rattlesnake, which has highly variable color patterns. And that's because this is a rock-dwelling rattlesnake. And rocks come in all different colors, you know, gray, whitish, pinkish. Sometimes they have lichens all over them that give them an orangish color. These snakes have evolved in those rocks, and over evolutionary time, the ones that match the rocks more survived more and have more babies. And so we get this color matching where we get all the different colors of the rainbow of these speckled rattlesnakes. Speckled rattlesnakes are the ones shown in red down here. They're exclusively a Southern California desert species and also along the coast in deeper Southern California. They used to be considered the same species as this one, the Panamint rattlesnake shown in orange. Panamint rattlesnake is basically occupying Death Valley, Owens Valley, and those sorts of areas. And this is the Panamint rattlesnake. Very, very similar in appearance to the southwestern speckled rattlesnake. Well, not these two individuals, but remember, they're going to be highly variable in their color because they match the rocks that they live in. So these two beautiful species are very uncommonly found away from rocks, but lots of those are going to be found in rocks. Speaking of desert species, this is one of my favorite places on the planet. It's the Kelso Sand Dunes. And this is a photo that Marissa, my friend, who's the photographer, took just this past May when I was there on a field trip with students. And you can see on the right here are two figures sitting on the ground. That's my graduate student Owen and I, who decided we were going to scale that really tall, difficult to walk in sand dune. We got about halfway up and we're like, nope, we were done. And so we didn't make it to the top, but that's okay because all the cool animals are down at the bottom, including these sidewinder rattlesnakes. Sidewinders are the favorites of many people because they're small, they're kind of cute. They have these interesting little horn-shaped structures over their eyes. And they are masters of camouflage. So they're sand-colored. They live in areas that have this wind-blown sand, like the dunes. And they are fascinating because they use sidewinding locomotion to crawl over the sand. So they actually move their bodies sideways through the sand. And it's thought that that's a more efficient form of locomotion than crawling straight, but also that it helps them to minimize the heat gain from the sand. Incidentally, my book talks a lot about the ethics of handling snakes and catching snakes and wildlife in general. And I certainly don't say we should never catch harmless snakes. Of course, rattlesnakes we should leave alone. But regular snakes, I say, you know, but poking, prodding at them, all these things, you know, we can, if we want a photo, sometimes we do those things. However, leaving snakes alone can be really amazing because you can see some really cool natural history observations. I talk a lot about those in my book. This sidewinder, for example, Marissa came back later and found that desert iguana had come out of this little hole next to it and she found the sidewinder in the process of eating it. If she had messed with that sidewinder for a photo, she may not have seen that. Sidewinder rattlesnakes live in the deserts as well. So both of these colors are for sidewinder rattlesnakes. They live, they're just different subspecies. So they live in the Mojave Desert going down into the Colorado Desert. All right, so just two more species to go over, and these are the two biggest species in California. This is the Western diamondback rattlesnake. And Western diamondback rattlesnakes are the longest species of rattlesnake and the heaviest species of snake in California. They only live just down here in extreme southeastern California. You may have heard of other snakes in California being called diamondbacks. That's just a misnomer. You know, a lot of rattlesnakes have diamond-shaped blotches on their backs. People call them a diamondback. But truthfully, the Western diamondback rattlesnake is only the one that lives down here. Now, of course, this snake goes into Arizona, New Mexico, Texas. That's the quintessential Sonoran desert snake. Very, very, very common out there. here in California, they're known to live in farm areas in the Imperial Valley, for example, in the Coachella Valley, and they're very common there. And then last but not least here is the red diamond rattlesnake. And the red diamond rattlesnake is another large-bodied rattlesnake. The red diamond rattlesnake lives basically just west of where the western diamondback rattlesnake lives. And then it only gets down into northern Mexico. So it has a really small range. In addition, you'll see that in California, it lives in places where there's really dense development, like of housing developments, etc. Orange County, Riverside County, San Diego County. So for that reason, the red diamond rattlesnake is actually in trouble. It's not endangered, but it could be if further steps are not taken to mitigate the issues with the red diamond rattlesnake. So the California Department of Fish and Wildlife lists this red diamond rattlesnake as a species of special concern. So it's illegal to interfere with, mess with, kill, otherwise harm a red diamond rattlesnake. Okay, so those were the 7 species of rattlesnakes that occur in California. And like I said, I'd be glad to show you or answer questions about those later on. And again, in my book, there is a species account on each one of those, including stories from the field on each one. But now I'm going to shift gears and I'm going to talk about rattlesnakes in general. Sure, some of these things vary from snake to snake, but this is focusing in using the western rattlesnake, which is the species that occurs up near you in Sacramento, those of you who live up there. But again, this is the one that's all throughout California, everywhere except the deserts. So I briefly am going to do a life cycle, and then let's talk more about the reproduction and feeding biology of these guys. All right, so we're here in the summer right now, where summer is a time of feeding. California ground squirrels are a favorite food of rattlesnakes. Those two animals go hand in hand. Rattlesnakes live in California ground squirrel burrows. They eat California ground squirrels a lot, especially the baby California ground squirrels. So these two really, really go hand in hand. And as summer starts to progress and we start to get those shorter days, longer nights, cooler temperatures, we start to move into a mating season where you might find rattlesnakes, which are typically solitary. You might find them together. So in this photo on the top right, we have a male who's being very attentive to a female. He's trying to mate with her. And you might get lucky, as shown here on the top right. When rattlesnakes mate, females can actually store sperm for years. We don't even know how long because the record we know of was discovered on accident and it was 5 years. So anyway, she'll store it for sure through the winter. And these rattlesnakes will overwinter down in squirrel burrows if it's a mild climate, or if it's a place where there's lots of rocky outcrops, rattlesnakes love to overwinter under there. They basically go underground and they kind of become catatonic as their body temperatures drop to match that of the environment underground. Now, it's notable to say that in places with really, really mild winters, like maybe over on the coast, rattlesnakes can be active all year round. But for the most part, including up in like the Sacramento area, rattlesnakes do have a hibernation period. And then in spring, all hell breaks loose. That is the main activity period for rattlesnakes. That's their primary mating season. So the fall was kind of like a little mating season, but in spring, that's the big mating season. That's when the male rattlesnakes, which are much bigger than female rattlesnakes, are out crawling around looking for females. That's when you're likely to see them together. And then a female, if she has enough body fat that year, is going to ovulate around May, and she becomes pregnant using either new sperm or stored sperm. And then she'll be pregnant all summer long. And what you're seeing here then is kind of the closing of this loop, is the birthing season for rattlesnakes has really just begun here in California. They tend to be pregnant from about May through about mid-August to mid-September is the peak. They can go anytime from July through October. But right now we're getting into peak birthing season. And as you're going to see shortly, one of the really cool things about female rattlesnakes is they sometimes get together to give birth, like these ones, and they sometimes exhibit complex social behaviors, including maternal care and even babysitting. So we'll talk about that in a couple minutes. So now I'm going to regale you with cool imagery of rattlesnake reproduction. This is a rattlesnake mother giving birth. She's a good mom. She's checking this baby that she just birthed over there, making sure it's okay as this one comes out. This is coming out inside its amniotic sac. It's very much like humans. There's an amniotic sac. There's a little umbilical cord that the baby was getting all of its oxygen and minerals and water through. And it has a little placenta. And so when this umbilical cord is going to rupture in just a minute, as we see the mother moving by, the baby's going to have to start taking its first breath. So it needs to get out of that amniotic sac. So here's a video of a Western diamondback rattlesnake punching through the amniotic sac and giving us a show. I just love that video. And then, of course, we have the beautiful Western Diamondback rattlesnake mother exhibiting that maternal care. So Western Diamondback moms, just like other species of rattlesnakes, take care of their babies for at least a couple of weeks following birth, sometimes longer. They protect them from predators. If I was to walk up towards them and they were scared, she would scoop them with her body back into the burrow, safety of the burrow. We'll talk a little bit more about rattlesnake maternal care later on. Okay, so I like to describe this video as it's hard being a rattlesnake. So watch what happens here. You see a kangaroo rat, right? Oh boy, we can bet that he probably didn't see that rattlesnake either. So now what we're going to do is we're going to look at this exact same strike taken by another camera that was off to the right. Instead of just being a regular camera that shows that really quick strike, this is the same snake, the same bite, the same kangaroo rat, much more clarity, and it's slowed down dramatically. So it's a high-speed video now, slowed dramatically down. Look at that. That kangaroo rat was able to avoid being envenomated, and it was confirmed by the scientists that it used its special ninja powers to avoid being envenomated. That's why this group of scientists down in San Diego State have basically dubbed this ninja rat. This is their artwork. I love it so much because they use their ninja-like skills to jump out of the way of rattlesnakes, sometimes even so much as kicking them in the face. Makes it really hard to be a rattlesnake though, right? Getting teased by kangaroo rats. So rattlesnakes, despite the fact that they miss a lot, they do eat a lot of rodents. And so this gets us into the section about explaining why rattlesnakes are important. Many of you probably already know that rattlesnakes play a really important role in our ecosystems, but I'd like to give you maybe a new perspective on that. Sure, of course, rattlesnakes eat lots of rodents, and those rodents are eating our plants. So if rattlesnakes were removed from the system, rodent populations would explode and they would eat our plants and our crops and animal feed down to nothing. But it's not just that, it's also the idea that rattlesnakes are eaten by other predators. So they're what we call a mesopredator, and they play this doubly important role in the stability of the food web. It's not really worth it for a mountain lion to go and catch a kangaroo rat, but the rattlesnake can actually package up a bunch of kangaroo rats into a nice big sausage for that mountain lion, making it more efficient. Okay. And indeed, rattlesnakes do really a good job of transferring that rodent food energy up the food web. But there's another reason why rattlesnakes are important that a lot of people don't realize. So this one may not be known to you. In the United States, it's actually true now that snake venoms save more human lives than they take. And so what you're looking at here is a figure showing just a brief history of some of the drugs that have been developed from animal venoms, things ranging from leeches to cone snails to snakes and lizards. And the idea is that through millions of years of evolution, a lot of animals have evolved venoms that interfere with the physiology of whatever it is they're trying to eat or whatever predator they're trying to deter. And so these could be harnessed by pharmaceutical companies, and indeed they have been, to impact the physiology of a person, in this case, in a positive way. So I'd like to draw your attention to this eptifibatide, which was released in the market in 1998. And eptifibatide is an anticoagulant that is prescribed to people who have stents put in their hearts following a heart attack or if they're at risk for a heart attack. And that's because blood clots are liable to form sometimes on those stents. And so this anticoagulant, which of course, evolutionarily speaking, was designed to cause the rodent prey to bleed to death internally, when harnessed appropriately for this drug, is actually going to prevent a blood clot from forming. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. There's additional drugs on the market from rattlesnake venoms, and there's a bunch more now that are in clinical trials. And so rattlesnakes are this really amazing and important inspiration for drugs that can save our lives. The other side to this, of course, is that snake venoms have to not take very many lives. Unfortunately, around the world, snakes do kill a lot of people every year, always in self-defense, but that's no comfort to someone whose relative is going to die from an accidental snake bite. In the United States, the reason we don't get very many deaths from snake bite is because we have life-saving antivenom. And so rattlesnake bites, which are the most serious bites and are very serious, I'm not minimizing the risk of a rattlesnake bite. If that happens, then people need to go to the hospital straight up. I'm not going to be talking today unless you have questions afterwards about what you should and shouldn't do specifically with snake bite, all that first aid things. This is more talk about the wonders of snakes. However, it's really easy to remember. Don't do anything to the wound. The only thing to do would be to take off any rings, any constricting rings, or if it's your dog, the dog's collar, because you don't want to have swelling that's going to constrict those. And then go straight to the hospital or the emergency vet for treatment with antivenom. That's it. Don't do anything else. Feel free to ask questions about that later. But like I said, that's not the subject of the talk today. What is me explaining to you why rattlesnakes are so wonderful and why they're so amazing. Okay. So back to these beautiful rattlesnakes that exist in California. Okay. The Western rattlesnake, like I explained earlier from my book, is this just amazing animal that lives all throughout the state. This is a reminder here to me that I'm going to read an excerpt from the book. And so this is just a kind of continuation on part of what I had read earlier. So with respect to Western rattlesnakes, I have uncovered hundreds under tin boards at junk piles. I have radio tracked hundreds with my students over the years, getting a chance to peer into their private lives for months or even years. I've rescued hundreds from yards where, if not for me, animal control officers or homeowners might have beheaded them just for daring to exist. With familiarity comes understanding and affection. Rattlesnakes are highly venomous and arguably even the most dangerous wildlife in California. Most people have never seen a wild rattlesnake and instead have learned to fear or hate rattlesnakes from their unfair portrayal in the media. Many wildlife television programs and YouTube channels show highly defensive rattlesnakes striking at the camera, rearing up, rattling, and otherwise acting terrifying. Like most everything on television and the internet, this is just for views and clicks. In reality, rattlesnakes are gentle creatures that just want to be left alone to go about their snaky business. Rattlesnakes only bite people to defend themselves, preferring to use their venom to dispatch and tenderize the prey that they will eat whole. Still, accidents do happen, and the consequences can be very severe. A little bit of knowledge goes a very long way in keeping people and their pets safe from rattlesnakes, and likewise in keeping rattlesnakes safe from people and their pets. All right. So I'm approaching the final section of the talk before we do Q&A, and I'd like you to take a critical look at this picture here. Most people would immediately notice this rattlesnake adult curled up, and then a baby rattlesnake, a brand new baby curled up on top of this snake. There's also another baby at the bottom, which you may not have seen. And when I have a live crowd that I can ask and interact with, I say, who is this adult to the baby? So answer yourselves, who is this adult to the babies? And most of you probably said it's the mother, because we've heard about this maternal attendance, the maternal care of rattlesnakes. However, I want to draw your attention to these hefty hindquarters of this female rattlesnake. She's still pregnant. These are not her babies. She's babysitting for another female who has recently given birth and is probably off looking for food. So what we once thought was a rule, we thought it was a rule that rattlesnakes would give birth and the moms would stay with the babies until they shed after 1 or 2 weeks and they would all separate, is not a rule. It varies very, very dramatically. This picture is kind of inspiration for the logo for our community science project called Project Rattlecam. And I'm going to be talking to you now a little bit about Project Rattlecam, which is something I'm extremely excited about. It was inspired by the Falcon Cam at UC Berkeley. I'm a UC Berkeley alum. I would say go Bears, go Falcons. And for anyone who doesn't know, this is a peregrine falcon nest that has been placed on the Campanile Tower at UC Berkeley for many years. And this allows viewers to watch the peregrine falcon female named Annie, and her mate used to be Grinnell. Now there's different mates, to feed their babies and us to watch, us to observe. There's something about watching it live in real time that's just really exciting because you feel like you're a part of nature. Well, a few years ago, I put in a live streaming camera on a local rattlesnake den, a very small one, but this spring we went big. And I spent my spring break actually in Colorado. So this is in Colorado, not California, but it's so exciting that you won't care. You'll love it. Installing this super next generation high-tech camera. This is a live streaming camera that, unlike the Falcon Cam that has the luxury of being able to tap into campus Wi-Fi and power, This is fully operational and remote. So it's solar powered. It streams via cellular. There's a weather station behind it. And the best part about it is that this camera is remotely controlled through cellular by my students here at Cal Poly in the lab, who with their laptops can remotely pan, tilt, and zoom and chat with people live on YouTube as they do it. So if you go to Colorado and install the cameras, you'll see something like this. This actually was a day when the weather was almost freezing. Surrounding all of this was a bunch of snow. This was just a one patch without snow. And the snakes would come out in the sun to bask. Indeed, we actually got blizzarded out 2 out of the 5 days we were there to install the camera. That's how, this is a high elevation Northern Colorado site. It's extremely, the elements are extremely difficult there. But out they were. And if I was to walk up to these snakes, they would do this. That's what rattlesnakes do when they're scared. In case you're wondering about the colored rattles, this is a different site where we actually had been marking some of the snakes for individual identification. We're not doing this at the Colorado rattlesnake campsite. But also, like, think about it. If I'm a scientist, I can't study rattlesnakes like this because they're disturbed. They're not behaving naturally. If I put that live streaming camera on them, then I can. And this is what you get. I just want everyone to behold the incredible quality of this live stream. So this was from May 29th, a bunch of very pregnant females hanging out together, absolutely not scared because they don't know they're being watched. And if we think about it, this is like one of the first times we're actually able to observe the behavior of free-ranging animals beyond just parents feeding their babies in bird nests. And we immediately see things like, what's that? That's some sort of communication between two females. People initially thought that that was a male doing this head jerking behavior onto the female, because male rattlesnakes will sometimes do that. But those are two pregnant females. And since then, we've just seen with hundreds and hundreds of hours of this, that they seem to have this complex series of nods and head jerks that may be a communication. We're trying to decode it. I don't know if we ever will, but it would be totally amazing to do that. This, on the other hand, is a male trying to mate with a female. So you can see it's much more of a full body jerk. He's got his tail wrapped around hers, but he's not gotten lucky yet. Well, one of the interesting things about this, which we discovered in June this year, is that this is what we call this area where we have the camera is called a rookery. It's a place where a bunch of pregnant females get together to give birth together. And we discovered that a few males hang around. Most of the males, because they also spend the winter here, I should say, all together with hundreds of snakes, probably thousands in one little area. But in the summer, the males mostly leave and they go miles around in the surrounding prairie to hunt rodents. Females who are pregnant stay behind. But we found that a few males stay behind, apparently trying to mate with the females too, which is pretty interesting and again, pretty new. Okay, so I want you to watch this. This is pretty funny. Garter snakes share the den with these rattlesnakes. And the garter snakes here form these big piles and they're trying to mate. And sometimes the rattlesnakes will get in the way. So this footage, we were watching it and we all thought it was pretty funny because if you know what garter snakes do when they're trying to wrap their tails, they're trying to mate. So that rattlesnake, kind of an odd position. So we thought this was funny, but I gave the footage to my husband and I said, can you narrate this with a funny voiceover? Because he's really good at that kind of stuff. So he did that. So here's his with a voiceover.
All right, you guys, listen up. This is not a place for you. This is not for you. Get your tail out of my face. This is not a place for you. This is a place for rattlesnakes. Look over here. These are rattles. You don't have them. You don't belong. Stop that. Get your tail off of me. Stop. God, garter snakes. Just, you're choking me. Stop it. Stop. Get off of me. Oh. Stop it! Stop! Okay. You don't. Oh. Oh. No! No! Oh, I hate garter snakes. Oh, this is no. I'm out. I'm out. This is nonsense. Oh, don't respect. I'm 4 times your size. This is nonsense. I could totally bite you. I got venom. I got real venom, not that rear fang crap that you have. Oh. No, don't go up there. Don't. They're animals. Those guys are complete jerks. Oh, hate garter snakes. They're the worst. Hit them.
So as you can see, we try to have fun with these as well, because in addition to this being a research tool, so to be clear, my graduate students are actually doing their theses, collecting data from this live feed. One of them is studying the rattlesnake social behavior, and one of them is studying how UV radiation and temperature at this high elevation site interact to impact their basking behavior. But another major role of this is outreach, is to show people that rattlesnakes are fascinating, gentle, interesting. They're not rattling, they're not striking. We see lots of really, really, really cool things that are happening when we actually watch rattlesnakes instead of threatening them. So here's one cool thing that we saw. Watch the rattlesnakes in the back right corner who are hanging out when this magpie shows up. So they're terrified, and you're about to see why. Look at how the magpie has grabbed that baby rattlesnake by the head so it wouldn't get bitten and just flies away with it. So we think that this, and this is the same video over again now, we think that this hill is basically just a smorgasbord for birds to come by and to be able to grab snakes. Now, we haven't seen that much. This is the only instance we've seen since May of predation. This happened early on in May, and we thought that this was going to be really common. We haven't seen it very much more. However, we think we might see it a little more in the future, and you'll see why in just a second. So, I have really exciting announcement about Project Rattlecam for you, which is that we've been watching daily with hundreds of online viewers who are really interested in it, asking questions about it in the chat all the time. And we've been on baby watch for a while because these pregnant females are due to have their babies any day, and they had their first babies today. So literally it was so recently that I didn't even have a chance to make a video out of it yet because YouTube hasn't downloaded yet. That's how quick it was, how recently it was. But today, the very first pregnant female of about 50 that are there had a litter of 9 pups. And we spent all day oohing and eyeing over those pups. And so I'm going to show you some information to invite you to follow along and watch with us. So before I stop for questions, I would like to acknowledge a lot of my collaborators for the book and also for the research that we do. Heyday Books was just really awesome in terms of, recognizing that the world needed a book on California snakes. And incidentally, California lizards and how to find them comes out in April. And then California amphibians and how to find them comes out in spring 2026. So one each a year apart. Eventual three-book set. Photographers who took all the amazing photos that you got to see today, and everyone else who helped with all these projects. If you'd like to learn more about California snakes, there's 3 ways to do it. The first is the wonderful, excellent, amazing online website called californiaherps.com. This is basically an online field guide. It's really wonderful. The second is a brand new California Amphibians and Reptiles Comprehensive Field Guide written by Jackson Shedd and Robert Hansen, which is coming out in February 2025. So I was privileged to review this, and it's amazing. This is a high-tech field guide that covers every little detail of all these animals, perfect for if you're going out, catch a frog, you want to identify what it is. And then, of course, my book, California Snakes and How to Find Them, which is not so much that detail like that would be in a field guide, but stories and entries on each one. And that book is available anywhere you can want to buy books. You can get it on Amazon, at your local bookstore, even at REI stores in California. You can also get it at my website if you would like a signed copy. You can go to centralcoastsnakeservices.com on the shop tab, and I will sign a copy and mail it to you. Again, that's centralcoastsnakeservices.com.
Maggie, I love you.
So
No
here
babies.
is, I'm almost done. Here is my last slide where you can learn more and follow us. So I encourage you all to check out my website, emilytaylorscience.com. That will take you, if you want, to Central Coast Snake Services. And then also Project Rattlecam, which is at rattlecam.org. So literally, if you go to rattlecam.org right now and you click on the Colorado cam, you can see live footage of rattlesnakes in Colorado. It's probably nighttime there right now, so it's probably zoomed in on their little crevice where they all pack in, and you can watch them live. The best times of day to watch the Colorado rattlesnakes are going to be about 8 a.m. California time and about 5 or 6 p.m. California time, but you can watch them all day long. And then finally, please follow us on social media. We're on Facebook and X and Instagram. Rattlecams is the Project Rattlecam social media. Snakey Mama is me, my personal one, and then Central Coast Snake Services, which by the way is my business where we do like free rattlesnake relocation from people's yards here on the Central Coast and consult with all other things designed to help people and venomous snakes coexist. So with that, thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and I'd be glad to answer any questions.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Taylor, for a really awesome talk. If folks have questions, you can either put them in the chat and I can relay them to Dr. Taylor, or you can raise your hand and ask the question on camera. I'll get things started. So you mentioned, the rattlesnakes generally don't want to use their venom for defense. It's mostly for hunting. So it seems like there's probably some sort of a cost to them for using the venom. So I was wondering, how long after they, take a prey item, how long does it take to regenerate that venom? What's the cost to them of using that?
Yeah, it's actually a complicated question because when a rattlesnake strikes a prey item or or uses it in defense, it doesn't use all of its venom. So it actually could have multiple strikes, one after another, that all had significant envenomations. But if you to kind of more directly answer your question, if you were to like milk a rattlesnake and get rid of all of its venom, it would take about 2 weeks until it was fully restored. And so rattlesnakes, many of their predators and prey have evolved resistance to their venom. So sometimes to kill a ground squirrel, even though the ground squirrel is small, it doesn't seem like it would take much venom. They have resistance, and so it takes a lot of venom. So if a rattlesnake has depleted its venom by striking other things, it may not be able to kill that prey item. So in terms of the energetic cost of making venom, it's not much at all. But the cost of using it is the missed opportunity that might happen if it runs out of venom or doesn't have enough venom. Because you saw how hard it was to catch prey, and you have to wait till it runs by. If you miss that opportunity when one finally does because you couldn't get enough venom into it, then that's a big problem.
All right, so we got a question in the chat. It's actually kind of related to a question I had. So there's, some reports about rattlesnakes rattling less or not rattling at all. So I've heard about rattlesnakes around Lake Berryessa that have stopped rattling. David's mentioning rattlesnakes in Southern California and Texas maybe rattling less because of pig predation. Could you speak about that?
Because of what predation?
Predation by feral pigs.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I'd be glad to talk about that. This is one of my favorite questions to answer. So first of all, I'm gonna acknowledge a rattlesnake myth that many of your viewers here may have heard of, which is the myth that baby rattlesnakes are more dangerous than adults. It's actually not true. In fact, bites from baby rattlesnakes are much less severe than bites from adults. And it's one of those things that's really just 100% myth. And it's been fascinating to try to learn where that came from. And it came from a newspaper in Los Angeles in the 1940s, and it spread out from there. Well, regarding the rattlesnakes not rattling anymore is a very similar situation where we're actually witnessing that myth growing right now in front of us. And so like all myths, there could be some seed of truth to it, but most of it is a myth. And there's certainly no evidence for it. So I'm going to tell you what I think is going on is that there was a hypothesis that this could be true. It was a hypothesis put forward by a graduate student back in the 90s who was interested in actually rattlesnakes in Texas, where they get collected heavily in certain areas for rattlesnake roundups. Every year, people go back to the same spot and collect. The idea there went that if there was a rattlesnake that didn't rattle and didn't give itself away, it was more likely to not get caught. It reproduced, it lived, passed on genes to its offspring. And so if it's heritable, that calmness, then maybe over time you would get more quiet rattlesnakes because all the loud ones that would pass on genes for loudness got caught. Okay, that was the hypothesis. Now it's really hard to study that. He was never able to do it. And it doesn't even really make sense if you think about it, because evolution happens on a much longer time scale. It's not happening on this just a couple generations here and there with what we're looking at. And also it's just a tiny area. It's not rattlesnakes in general. So there's a lot of problems with that that make me skeptical to begin with. But then what happened is that someone was interviewed on NPR a while back and said that as a fact instead of a hypothesis. And then everyone's like, oh. And then what it did was it fed right into something that you all probably know of as confirmation bias, which is this situation where you hear that someone hears, oh, rattlesnakes are rattling less. And then you go out and you see a rattlesnake and it doesn't rattle. And you're like, see, they're rattling less. This is how people's brains work. And the problem with that is that rattlesnakes never rattle very much. They don't. Rattlesnakes do not rattle very much. Yeah, certain individuals do. They have personalities. You know, I've studied many hundreds of individuals of 4 different species now with radio telemetry in the field. Some of them are pissy and they rattle at you from 20 feet away, and some of them never rattle, no matter how much you pick them up and, you know, prod them to take collective data on them. So I believe that it is largely a myth, confirmation bias, supported myth. However, there could be some truth to it in certain areas. I don't believe that it's because of pigs, etc. Rattlesnakes mostly rely on camouflage anyway, so they actually would be giving themselves away to pigs, if you think about it. I think that it could happen where in certain populations where there's a lot of people around, rattlesnakes could become habituated to those people. There is one paper out of Canada that shows that rattlesnakes in an area where there's lots of people, like a golf course, don't rattle very much. And their hypothesis was that they were habituated to people, whereas in the wild, they still rattle a lot. Unfortunately, they only have one population in each, so there's no replication, there's no good scientific data. So I'm a huge doubter of that myth, but I also find it really, really fascinating because it could be true on certain local scales for different reasons.
Great. So another question from the chat. Let's say we're going down the hiking trail. There's a rattlesnake that's sunning itself across the trail, is not being responsive to, you know, being shooed along. What's the best way to approach that?
Yeah, great question. So first of all, in general, you want to stay about 10 feet away from rattlesnakes, admire them from a distance, like I said. So if you can go around them, that's the best thing. Some trails, you know how you're able to walk around them. If it's a really narrow trail where you can't get around them, or if you are really worried that the rattlesnake is going to get run over by a mountain biker or that kind of thing, then it's a good idea to just kind of sit and wait and try to wait the snake out and let it go across on its own. Usually the idea of it being unresponsive to moving, most snakes would move if you encourage them to by like poking them with a small stick, just gently, or maybe throwing some dirt at their tail. Occasionally it backfires and the snake gets defensive and sits there and rattles at you from the middle of the trail. But if you do that, if you leave, the rattlesnake is going to take off, because if it's been rattling, they'll take off afterwards. So again, rattlesnake behavior is really unpredictable from individual to individual, so it's tricky, but usually that rattlesnake will move on along on its way. So we try to say, let it go away on its own, help shepherd it across if you can, but by no means should you get your hands anywhere near it or pick it up. Most of people know that, right? Don't poke it, don't prod it. By all means, please don't pick it up like all those people on YouTube are doing now. It's just driving me insane. It's super, super irresponsible. People are going to get bit. Yeah, you know what? You might pick up a rattlesnake and it might not bite you, but another one might. So it's very, we have to be respectful of rattlesnakes. And I have a section in my book called California Rattlesnakes Deserve Our Respect, Not Our Fear, where I talk about a lot of strategies for coexisting with rattlesnakes. I talk about how to be safe in rattlesnake country, why rattlesnakes are important, and how we can coexist with them.
All right, another question from the chat. Is there any evidence that global warming is having an impact on rattlesnakes?
That's a really good question. So there's actually a study out of my lab done by my students a few years ago, and people can go to this Emily Taylor Science if you want.com and go to the research component of that to find all of our papers are downloadable on my website at Cal Poly, the Physiological Ecology of Reptiles Lab. And we did a study that showed that rattlesnakes along California coastal areas, so coastal and inland, but not deserts. We didn't study desert animals. That climate change is projected to help them. They will do better. We believe that many of them live in areas right now that don't allow them to get to their optimal temperatures very often. either it's long winters or cold nights. So with climate change, we basically modeled that using data we've collected and showed that they'll have more time to be active, more time to find, food and mates, and more time to make baby rattlesnakes. So we expect climate change in terms of the global warming aspect of it to benefit a lot of rattlesnakes in California. Now, that might not be true in some deserts. If you go over to Arizona, in Phoenix, I mean, I think those rattlesnakes are probably living at the peak of their thermal tolerance already. So continued warming certainly wouldn't be good for them. So it's a complicated matter. The next thing about global climate change is how it changes water. And California, different parts of California are projected to become more drought stricken, and others are projected to become wetter. But certainly rattlesnakes are impacted by water. They have to drink water. They can't get water just from the mice they eat. Rattlesnakes come into people's yards when they're seeking water. And so how it's going to affect them overall is complicated, but it's definitely going to increase the interactions with us because they look for irrigation water, water from bird bath pools when it's really hot right now, like it's hot and dry right now, they're looking for it. So those are a couple of things to to keep in mind.
Great. So that's a good segue into our next question from the chat, which is there a perfect distance to relocate a rattlesnake away from your house, such that they won't come back, but not so far that they're in danger because they're in unfamiliar terrain?
That's a really excellent question, and it's a subject of a lot of it used to be a subject of a lot of controversy. I don't really believe it's controversial anymore. To some people it is, but I think that if people read the science on it, they'll be convinced that it's not super controversial anymore. For that reason, my students and I wrote a comprehensive guide to California rattlesnake relocation for the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. That's available for download on my Central Coast Snake Services website. If you go to centralcoastsnakeservices.com and go to press and links, you can find basically a paper we wrote that has everything every data ever collected on relocation of rattlesnakes in California. So I'm pretty confident in being able to give you a rule of thumb, which is that based on the science, if you relocate a rattlesnake about a quarter mile to a half mile away into appropriate habitat, which is going to be a place where they can hide, good habitat, not near homes, not near roads, then they have a really good chance of doing well because they're basically still in their home range or near it. They're not wandering around trying to figure out where they are. And they don't come back very often. So sometimes they do come back. The closer you release them, they might come back, but it doesn't seem to be very often. And so Central Coast Snake Services, for example, we've been relocating rattlesnakes for it's our 6th year now here on the Central Coast. And we've had one of hundreds that has come back. And that was one that was relocated about a quarter mile away. He really wanted to come back to this spot, I guess. And so the second time we relocated him more like a half mile away. As many people know, probably including the person who asked that question, relocating rattlesnakes a long distance away, like 20 miles away, it seems good to the person because you're like, there's no way it can get back. That's true. And it looks like good habitat to you, but that snake knows it's not near home and it tries to find home, and it's really sad because it gets run over by a car, eaten by a hawk. So yeah, rule of thumb, quarter mile to a half mile away if possible.
All right, then another question from the chat. They said they've noticed over the past 30 years, they see a lot of rattlesnake bites occurring in April. Is that consistent with what you've seen? And if so, what do you think the reason might be for that uptick?
So I certainly don't know if there's an uptick. If there is an uptick, it's probably just population related, not rattlesnake related. Like, in other words, I don't think it's complicated, right? I don't know the data on whether there's more bites. There's certainly probably more bites because there's more people, but whether there's more bites per person, I don't know. However, if this person is observing that in their area, it could be for a number of reasons, right? It could be because there's more construction in the area that displaces rattlesnakes, so that rattlesnakes are more likely to move into homes. It could be because there was like a park that was built into an area where there's rattlesnakes, so people were stepping on rattlesnakes on trails. You really have to look and see what that reason would be. I will say that the time of year does meet my expectations. Spring is the major time that I told you earlier that rattlesnakes are moving around, right? Males are looking for females. So that's when you're most likely to come into contact with them. Down here on the Central Coast, May is our peak month for a number of different things, including for rattlesnake interactions. But I'm guessing it's probably just because up in the Sacramento area, you probably warm up a little earlier than we do on the coast down here. So yeah, for example, Santa Barbara, the city of Santa Barbara, as of I think it was May 8th of this year, they had already had 7 rattlesnake bites, whereas they had 2 in all of last year. And 5 of those bites were to hikers to the foot. And I think a big problem with that is that we used to have those big, thick hiking boots that covered our ankles and our feet. And now the style has transitioned to lightweight, breathable, mesh paneled shoes that will let your feet air out, but are like butter to a rattlesnake fangs if you accidentally step on one. So I think that's another thing that plays a role. And then in Santa Barbara, the other 2 were people who were gardening and didn't see the snake. So note that all of those bites were all what we call legitimate bites, meaning they're accidental bites. It wasn't somebody messing with the snake. It wasn't someone trying to kill the snake. Those do happen, but it turns out that a lot of bites are legitimate accidents that could be prevented with the correct footwear or with a lot of that situational awareness.
And then what is the overall trend for Western rattlesnake populations, in the state, particularly as habitat destruction continues?
Yeah, that's a hard one to answer because there's not a lot of people studying it. So all I can really do is give you kind of my feel based on, looking for snake hunting myself. So obviously there's fewer rattlesnakes in the state of California than there once was, and that's because of habitat destruction, right? There's a lot of big cities and urban areas where rattlesnakes don't make it into anymore. That said, Western rattlesnakes are very resilient. They're not at risk for extirpation because they have a lifestyle that makes them, like I said, very resilient. They they mature rapidly, they reproduce often, they have lots of babies. They are pretty resilient to living around people. So unless California turns into a, complete concrete and cemented over area, which I doubt, rattlesnakes are still going to do fine in California. The one exception is possibly the red diamond rattlesnake, which in addition to living in a small area, also has delayed reproduction, spends a lot of time between reproductive bouts. It's just much more of a slow lane snake than Western rattlesnakes. So overall, as a species, Western rattlesnakes don't have anything to worry about. But of course, populations have gone extinct due to habitat destruction for sure.
All right, we've got time for one final question. If anyone has any other questions. Linton's asking, are wild turkeys predators of rattlesnakes?
Yes. They're like dinosaurs, right? Big velociraptors. I think they're probably predators of everything. Yeah, wild turkeys certainly do eat young rattlesnakes. I don't think they eat the big rattlesnakes. If it doesn't make sense to me that they would, but if maybe they do, and I just don't know about it. Yeah, wild turkeys will eat young rattlesnakes. Not as much as certain non-native birds like guinea fowl. A lot of people keep guinea fowl in their yards, and yes, they deter rattlesnakes by killing them. Unfortunately, they also deter all other wildlife too. They'll kill all snakes, they'll kill lizards, they kill anything that moves because, like I said, they're like little velociraptors. As do chickens, by the way. If you have free-ranging chickens in your yard, they'll kill a lot of stuff. So it's generally thought though that having a potential deterrent like a guinea fowl is probably probably more environmentally friendly than having something like a barn cat, which of course those animals, if they're left outside, do kill, lots of birds and other native wildlife every year. So cats really should be kept inside. So wild turkeys, they do, but they're probably not a major predator. Major predators of rattlesnakes in California are hawks and owls, wild pigs. So our feral pigs, they love to eat rattlesnakes, badgers, and then, things like canids and felids. And then of course, California king snakes. California king snakes are immune to rattlesnakes and they eat them. So those are some of the major ones. That's probably a fun way to end the talk, right? All hail the king snake.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you again, Dr. Taylor, and thanks to everyone for coming out. Be sure to tune in next month, where our speaker will be Cecilia Walsh from Tree Davis. We'll be talking about types of trees you can plant to get ready for climate change and other environmental concerns. All right, thanks again. Have a great rest of your Thursday, everyone.